I was trimming the final stems for my wedding centerpieces when the call that changed everything came through. My name is Alice, and 3 days before I was supposed to marry the love of my life, my world tilted on its axis. It was a Tuesday evening in late October, the kind of gold-lit evening that smells like wood smoke and fallen leaves. I was in my small studio, the one I converted from an old garage, arranging roses for the reception. My hands were stained with chlorophyll, the radio was humming some folksy tune about long roads, and the phone screen lit up with a single word, Dad. I answered on speaker, too busy to hold it properly. His voice was flat, distant, the kind of tone he used when discussing insurance claims. Alice, I can't do it. I can't walk you down the aisle. I set down the shears. The metal clicked against the stone countertop. I wiped my hands on my apron, a worn canvas thing that smelled of soil and hard work. Silence stretched between us, a heavy, awkward pause that felt like a physical weight. I could hear the faint drone of a television in the background, some evening news program. He didn't say he was sorry. He didn't say he wanted to. He said, "Your sister, Emily, she's having a rough time. She says it would be a trigger for her. You understand, don't you?" He was asking me to understand that my wedding day, the culmination of a lifelong dream, was now subordinate to my older sister's emotional comfort. How do you even begin to process that kind of logic? 10 minutes later, my mother called to reinforce the message. She didn't beat around the bush. "It's for the best, Alice. You should just walk yourself down the aisle. It's very modern." Very empowering. She said empowering the way someone might say interesting about a particularly bad painting. The subtext was clear. Don't make a fuss. You're not the main character here. Emily is. Emily and her crumbling marriage, Emily and her fragile ego, Emily and the 2 children she was using as bargaining chips to keep our parents tethered to her drama. I grew up in a small town in the Hudson Valley, the kind of place with a diner, a library, and a hardware store that's been in the same family for 100 years. It's the kind of place where everyone knows which car you drive, but almost nobody knows what you dream about at night. Emily was the golden child. She was the academic, the one with the perfect SAT scores, the one who could play the piano and debate politics with equal flair. My parents' world orbited around her. When she was on the debate team, they attended every single match, often skipping my own science fairs or art shows to be there for her. "She has a real future, Alice," they'd say, as if my love of botany and landscape design was just a cute hobby. What does a real future even look like anyway? I was the one who built things. When I was 12, I used scrap lumber from a neighbor's renovation and a roll of greenhouse plastic to construct a small, crooked greenhouse in our backyard. It leaned a little to the right, and the door was a repurposed cabinet hinge, but I grew tomatoes the size of softballs in that little structure. I kept a meticulous log of soil pH, watering schedules, and sunlight exposure. The year I entered my tomatoes in the county science fair, I won first prize. My father showed up near the end, after my mother had already taken a picture of me holding the ribbon. He glanced at the project, gave a quick nod, and said, "Nice work, kid." Then he checked his phone for a message from Emily. It was a dismissal so quiet I could almost pretend it hadn't happened. That greenhouse stood in our yard for years. I repaired its sagging roof and patched its torn plastic. My mother called it an eyesore. My father just called it nothing. But it grew. Every single summer, it produced something beautiful, even when no one was looking. My high school graduation was on a Thursday. That same week, Emily received early acceptance to a prestigious business school. We had a joint celebratory dinner. All 3 toasts were about Emily. My father lifted his glass and spoke of her bright future. My mother dabbed her eyes and said she always knew Emily would be a success. I sat there, cutting my pasta into small pieces, and clapped along with everyone else. No one mentioned my diploma. No one asked about the horticulture program at the state college I'd gotten into. I had paid my own application fee from the landscaping jobs I'd been doing since I was 15. I mowed lawns, weeded gardens, and planted flower beds for neighbors, charging whatever they could afford. When I told my mother I wanted to major in horticulture, she set down her coffee cup and gave me a look like I'd just spoken in a dead language. "That isn't a career, Alice. What are you going to do with that?" she asked. It was a question designed to dismiss, not to understand. Years later, I heard from a family friend that my mother had told her sister I was just playing in the dirt. My parents paid Emily's tuition in full. I paid for my own school through a combination of loans, summer landscaping work, and part-time jobs in the campus greenhouse. My educational debt was a footnote, never discussed at the dinner table. Emily married a man named Nathan 3 years after she graduated. He was a finance professional who wore suits that cost more than most people's monthly rent. My parents were a glowing, immaculate portrait of pride at her wedding. Then the grandchildren came. First Lily, then Owen. My father, who had retired from his insurance job, became their full-time, unpaid caretaker. He visited Emily's house 3 times a week. He built a play structure in her yard. He read the same book to Owen over and over until the boy fell asleep. Emily noticed. She noticed the way a cat notices a lever to pull for treats. The first time she used the kids as a weapon was overseating at a holiday dinner. Emily wanted to sit at the head of the table, a position my father had always held. He gave it to her without a fight. The second time was over a family photo. Emily wanted me removed from the background. My father asked me to step aside. The third time, I heard it myself. It was a speakerphone call. My father didn't know I was in the kitchen. Emily's voice was calm, practiced, and utterly devastating. "Dad, I'm serious. If you walk her down the aisle at her wedding, I'm not bringing the kids for Christmas. It's just too much for me right now." My father's pause was only a few seconds long. Then he said, "Okay, Emily, okay." My mother walked in and saw my face. She didn't apologize. "She's their mother, Richard," she said to my father, as if that made the emotional hostage-taking acceptable. It was the hierarchy. Emily, then the grandchildren, then my parents' comfort. I was somewhere in the background, a silent figure holding a camera. I met my husband, Daniel, on a job site. He was an architect, and I was the landscape designer for a public park project. We both showed up at dawn. We both drank black coffee. He saw me struggling to lift a heavy root ball from my truck and walked over. "You need a hand?" he asked. "I've got it," I said, stubbornly refusing help. "I know, but I'm bored, and my coffee's already gone," he replied, smiling. That was the moment I knew I was in trouble. Our first date was a walk through a botanical garden, followed by street tacos from a vendor in a parking lot. He had dirt on his boots. I had dirt on mine. It was the most comfortable I'd ever felt with another human being. I met his father, Frank, a few weeks later. Frank is a retired carpenter. He's a man of few words, with hands that look like they've been sanded smooth by decades of hard work. He still lives alone in the house he built with his wife before she passed away from cancer almost a decade ago. He has a workshop in the back of the property, a space that smells of sawdust and linseed oil. He called me kid from the moment we met. By the second month, he'd built me a bookshelf. It was made of white oak, with dovetail joints and a hidden surprise on the inside of the left panel, my initials, A.L., carved in small, careful letters. He never mentioned it. He just left it for me to find. The first time he visited my home greenhouse, he said, "You've got dirt under your nails." Good means you got something done today. No one in my family had ever said that to me. Daniel proposed to me in the garden I had designed for the town library. It was an autumn evening, and the Japanese maples were a riot of crimson and gold. He knelt on the stone path, right next to the bench I'd installed the previous year. I said yes before he even finished the question. That night, I called my parents. My father answered. I told him the news. There was a silence. A long one. Then he said, "Congratulations, it was flat, professional, the voice he used with a coworker." My mother took the phone and asked, "Is he from a good family?" She didn't ask if I was happy. She asked about his background. "He is," I said. "His father is a carpenter." There was another, more significant silence. Then she said, "Well, I suppose it's fine." I sent the wedding invitations by hand. I designed them myself, using botanical illustrations and pressed fern leaves. I delivered one to my parents' house personally. I left it in the mailbox. I couldn't watch them open it. I also asked my father to walk me down the aisle. He said yes, but it was a quick, almost thoughtless agreement. Daniel saw my hesitation. "You know who they are, Alice," he said gently, his hand on my knee. "I know," I said, "but I want to give them one more chance." He nodded. He never tells me what to do. He just makes sure I have a soft place to fall. The call that shattered that final, fragile hope came on that Tuesday. I was in my workshop, trimming the final stems for the 14 centerpieces I had grown myself. The radio was on, and I was humming along to a song with a fiddler. My phone lit up with Dad. I picked up. "Alice, I need to tell you something," he said, his tone careful and detached. "I can't walk you down the aisle. Emily thinks it would be too hard for her. I put down the shears. I counted to 5. Dad, I'm the one getting married. This is my day." "I know. But you know how she is. Her marriage is falling apart. So my wedding is about her feelings?" I asked. The silence was thick, suffocating. I could still hear the TV in the background. "A game show." "I'm sorry, Alice. Is she threatening you with the kids again?" More silence. Then his voice dropped lower, full of shame. "She said, if I walked you, she wouldn't bring Lily and Owen for Christmas." There it was, the same lever, pulled for a decade. He always folded. "Okay, Dad," I said. "Okay," I hung up. My hands didn't shake. I was completely numb. My mother called 10 minutes later. It was orchestrated. "Don't make a scene, Alice," she said. "Walk down the aisle alone. It's becoming very common. No one will think anything of it." "Mom, I asked him a year ago. He said yes. Things change. Your sister is suffering. You have Daniel." "I have Daniel," I repeated, the irony of her words hitting me like a physical blow. "So I should just accept this? You should stop making a drama, Alice. This isn't the hill you want to die on." I hung up. I walked out to my back porch. The October air was cold enough to see my breath. I sat on the steps, staring at my garden. The hydrangeas were losing their color. The lavender was still holding on, fragrant and tough. I held my phone, the screen dark. Daniel found me a few minutes later. He didn't ask what was wrong. He just sat beside me and waited. Eventually, he put his arm around my shoulders. We sat in silence. The next morning, 2 days before the wedding, Daniel made breakfast. He makes the best scrambled eggs, fluffy and chive-studded, a skill he developed just for me. "My father isn't coming," I said. "He's not walking me." "I know," he said. "What do you want to do?" Not, "I'll fix this," or "let me talk to him." Just, "What do you want?" That's Daniel. He doesn't try to save me. He just stands beside me and hands me the tools I need to save myself. "I don't want to walk alone," I said. "Then you won't," he replied, pouring me coffee. "My dad has been practicing his Thai for the ceremony. He's watched 3 different YouTube tutorials." I smiled. It was the first one in 12 hours. I can't ask Frank to do that. It's too much. What would he even think of such a request? "Alice, that man built you a bookshelf he didn't have to build. He drives 40 minutes every Saturday to fix a hinge you didn't ask him to fix. He's been waiting. He just didn't want to overstep. Something cracked in my chest, not pain. Something warm. Realization. "Okay," I said. "I'll ask him." My maid of honor, Claire, called an hour later. She is the kind of friend who tells you when you have spinach in your teeth and then fixes your makeup in 30 seconds. She'd run into Emily at the salon that morning. "Your sister is telling everyone how hard this wedding is for her," Claire said. "She's making it about her. She told the colorist that you've been getting all the attention since you started your landscaping business. She called it a little garden project." I closed my eyes. It was my mother's words, spoken in Emily's voice. The same poison, passed down. "She's not upset about the wedding," Alice Claire continued. "She's jealous. You have Daniel. You have your business. You have a life she doesn't need her parents to validate, and she can't stand it." I thought about Thanksgiving the previous year. Emily had hosted. Her husband, Nathan, had spent the entire dinner on his phone. Emily had been loud, manic, trying to fill the room with chatter to obscure the deafening silence of a dead marriage. Owen, her 3-year-old, had asked a question that made the room freeze. "Why does Daddy sleep in the office?" The table had gone quiet. Emily's hands had trembled as she poured the wine. She'd forced a smile, but I'd seen it. The crack in the facade. Her marriage wasn't just going through a rough patch, it was in freefall. And instead of admitting it, she was trying to sabotage my happiness to distract from her own crumbling world. That morning, 2 days before the wedding, I drove to Frank's house. He lives on a quiet, wooded road. His house is a modest, single-story structure with a porch he rebuilt himself. The garage smells of cedar and linseed oil. He was sanding a rocking chair when I pulled up. I stood at the entrance of the workshop, watching him work for a moment. "Hey, kid," he said, looking up. "Coffee's inside." "Frank," I started. He saw something in my face. He set down the sandpaper, turned to me fully, and wiped his hands on his apron. "My father backed out of walking me," I said. He didn't ask why. He didn't offer an opinion. He just said the 5 words that changed everything. "What time do you need me?" No hesitation, no questions, just a simple, profound offer of support. "Saturday, 1 o'clock. "I'll be there at noon," he said, picking his sandpaper back up. He added, more quietly, "I've been waiting for someone to ask, kid." The next 48 hours blurred by. Claire handled the logistics with her signature efficiency. She updated the seating chart, removing my father's name and adding Frank Delaney. The front row, center aisle, was now his. Daniel took his father's suit shopping. Frank swore he still had a sport coat from the 90s. Daniel sent me a picture from the fitting room. Frank looked proud and slightly overwhelmed in a new charcoal suit, his rough hands looking out of place against the crisp cuffs. I wrote my vows. I wrote them in my workshop, sitting next to the bookshelf Frank had made. I wrote them on the back of a landscaping sketch. I crossed out lines, rewrote words, until I had something simple and true. My parents didn't call. They didn't text. I checked my phone twice. Then I put it in a kitchen drawer and forgot about it. I didn't tell them about Frank. I let them assume I would walk alone. I wanted the surprise to be their first lesson. 2 days before the wedding, there was a knock on my door. It was Ruth, an elderly neighbor who had been my grandmother's closest friend. She stood on my porch, holding a yellowed envelope. "Your grandmother asked me to give you this," she said, her eyes glistening. "She asked me to hold on to it until you were getting married." It was a letter from my grandmother, who had passed away years earlier. I opened it at the kitchen table. The handwriting was frail and elegant. "Alice, when you read this, you'll be on the edge of a big day. I wish I could be there. I wish I could tell your mother to sit down and let you shine. I wish I could tell your father to stop looking at whatever is distracting him and truly see you. But I know how that family works, so I'll say what they won't. You are a builder. You make things grow. You create gardens from nothing. The people who show up for you are your real family. I love you, Alice. Build something beautiful." I read it 3 times. Then I folded it carefully and placed it in a small beaded purse I would carry at the wedding. The night before the wedding, the rehearsal dinner was at the venue. Frank arrived early and helped the caterer move tables. He can't stand to watch someone lift something heavy without offering a hand. There were 30 guests, mostly from Daniel's side and a few of my closest friends. No one from my biological family was there. The barn looked perfect. Open sides, string lights, wildflower arrangements I'd grown myself. Frank gave a toast. He held his glass firmly. "I ain't much for speeches," he said. "But I'll say this. 3 years ago, a woman showed up at my son's job site and hauled a root ball out of a truck like it owed her money. I liked her instantly. I never had a daughter. The Lord just made me wait a little longer for one." He paused, looked at me. "Here's to Alice. She makes things grow." The room fell silent. Claire was already crying. Daniel squeezed my hand. I looked at Frank's sleeve. I saw a tiny trace of sawdust caught in the fold of his cuff. He had come straight from the workshop. He always came from the workshop. On Saturday morning, the wedding day, I woke up at dawn. I made coffee and sat on the porch. The world was quiet and cold, the first frost of the season kissing the fallen leaves. I looked at my hands. They were calloused from years of work, etched with the small, proud scars of a gardener. These hands had built a greenhouse at 12. They had dug beds, planted seeds, and signed a business license. They had arranged 14 centerpieces for a wedding my own family couldn't be bothered to attend with any grace. What did they really know of my life? I showered, dressed, and pinned up my hair. I wore a pearl hairpin that had been Ruth's, given to me with the letter. I looked in the mirror. I didn't see a victim. I saw a woman with clear eyes and a clear plan. The bridal suite was a small room in the barn. Claire was there, ready with makeup. Ruth arrived with a velvet box containing my grandmother's pearl earrings. "Something borrowed," she said. "Something old." Claire fixed my hair. My friends, my chosen family, filled the room. I glanced at the door once. Claire saw me. "Stop looking at that door, Alice. Everyone who matters is already in this room." Then Frank knocked. He was in his new suit, looking tall and sturdy. He looked at me. He doesn't cry often, but his eyes filled immediately. He blinked hard. "Don't you cry, Frank. I just did my mascara," I said. "I'm not crying." "Sawdust," he replied gruffly. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small box. Inside was a boutonniere, made from dried oak leaves and baby's breath, tied with twine. "Made it this morning. Figured flowers from a store wouldn't feel right." I pinned it to his lapel. It was the same white oak as the bookshelf. "You look beautiful," he said, then corrected himself. "No, you look strong." It was exactly the right word. When the music started, I took his arm. He steadied me. "You good, kid?" he asked. "I'm good," I said. "Then let's go show them what showing up looks like." The barn doors swung open. Light poured in, golden and brilliant. 200 heads turned. And there we were, Frank and I, a carpenter and a gardener. Not related by blood, bound by choice. We walked. I didn't look at the back row. I looked straight ahead at Daniel, who was beaming through his tears. This was my wedding day. I wasn't walking alone. The doors were open, and the man holding my arm was my father by choice. When we reached the altar, Reverend Keene asked the question, "Who gives this woman to be married?" Frank cleared his throat. He is a man who builds things, not a man who gives speeches. But he addressed the room. "Her family," he said, his voice steady. Then, quieter, like he was speaking to me alone, all of us who showed up. The room exhaled in a collective sigh of relief. I heard Claire let out a choked sob. Frank turned to me, took both my hands, and squeezed them once. Then, he placed my hand in Daniel's. "Go get married, kid," he said, stepping back. He walked to the front row and sat in the seat labeled with his name. My father's seat. Daniel leaned into his father and whispered, "Thank you." Frank just nodded, folding his hands in his lap, a tiny fragment of sawdust on his right cuff. The ceremony was perfect. When it came time for my vows, I spoke from the heart. I promised to choose Daniel and the family we were building together. Not the one we were handed. We were married. The reception was a whirlwind of joy. People danced, ate, and celebrated. Frank gave another toast, short and sweet. The first time Alice came to my house for dinner, I had a fern on the windowsill that was dying. It had been dying for a year. She walked in, looked at it, and 10 minutes later she'd repotted it, moved it to a different window, and told me I was overwatering it. I knew then that any woman who saves a dying plant without being asked is the kind of woman who will save a dying old man from eating alone every Sunday. The room erupted. My father, Richard, found me at the dessert table. He looked tired, worn out. "Alice," he said, "that man did a good job today." "His name is Frank," I said. "He did a good job," he repeated. Silence. He couldn't look me in the eye. "I wanted to say I'm sorry," he started. "Sorry that you missed it," I said. "Or sorry that everyone saw." He flinched. Before he could answer, my mother appeared. "Richard, come sit down," she said, steering him away. She leaned into me, her voice low. "Don't make a scene, Alice. I'm not making a scene," I said. "I'm cutting my wedding cake." She walked away, pulling him with her. The father-daughter dance wasn't a father-daughter dance. It was a dance with Frank. We danced to an acoustic version of a classic song about leaning on someone. He danced carefully, holding my hand and my shoulder. "I'm going to step on your feet," he warned. "I know," I laughed. Daniel told me. The room watched us, a carpenter dancing with a gardener. It was simple and true. At the corner table, I saw Emily, watching us, gripping her champagne flute. Ruth walked over and said something to her. I saw Emily's eyes fill with tears. She stood up and went to the bathroom. She didn't come back for a while. I didn't go after her. I kept dancing. My parents slipped out before the end. They left without saying goodbye. I didn't see them go. I didn't watch them leave. Weeks later, I heard from a neighbor that my father had cried in the car on the way home. He had sat in his garage, staring at a photo of me as a child, holding a tomato from my greenhouse. The greenhouse was long gone, but the outline of it was still faintly visible in the lawn. He had tried to send me a text that read, "I am proud of you." But he had deleted it. He'd never sent it. 2 weeks after the wedding, Emily called me. I was on a job site measuring a garden for a new children's wing at the local hospital. Her voice was different. "Broken, Nathan left me," she said. "He moved out. He just left a note." I waited. "I just thought you should know," she said. "Okay," I said. I thought if I could keep Mom and Dad focused on me, it would fill the gap. Nathan wasn't there. The kids weren't enough. I needed to be the center of something. And your wedding was in the way. Your happiness was in the way. It was the most honest thing she'd ever said. "Emily," I said finally, "I hope you find what you need. I mean that. But I can't be your emotional cushion anymore. I'm done being the one you push down so you can feel better about yourself." She cried. I let her. Then I said goodbye and went back to work. A letter arrived from my father a week later. Handwritten, he wrote that he should have walked me down the aisle. He knew it then, and he knew it when he watched Frank do it. He said he was a coward. He said he let Emily use the children as a wall between us. He said he kept the peace by keeping me at a distance. He told me he was proud of me. He said it a few times. He ended the letter by saying, "I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't think I would forgive me either." I read the letter twice. Then I folded it and placed it in a drawer next to my grandmother's letter. They are two very different weights. I used to think family was a matter of blood. I don't think that anymore. Family is the man who drives 40 minutes to fix a hinge you didn't ask him to fix. Family is a letter from a grandmother who has been gone for 11 years. Family is who shows up. That is my story. 3 days of silence, one letter from a grandmother, and a carpenter who said yes before I could even finish asking the question. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to Winds of Thought for more stories about real family, boundaries, and the people who show up when it matters most.